Mosque, and I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank you all for committing your time in the course of propagating Islam, addressing issues within our community, so be able to participate at this very key event. This event is very important to me personally as a mother, as a magistrate. I feel honored that you're able to honor us to do this event collectively together, because I think by working together on behalf of our community, we can achieve more. So that's the premise of what we're doing. You will have heard from the various media outlets. On Sunday, there was a shooting of a 21-year-old person in Manchester. The last week, about 6 people have died from violence, and it is prevalent within our community. When I say our community, again, it's not so much the Muslim community, but we want to talk about within our own community, what can we do? And what I intend to do is for you to be able to focus on 3 areas. I'll mention the 3 areas before we do the opening Quran. The 3 areas we want to focus on: what are the key challenges? What has been your experiences to manage this? And with the cost of living crisis that we have been talking about, what do we need to do to support it, to tackle this? Because one of the things that some of you might have heard is that it is felt that the impacts of the rising cost could have a real impact on violence in future. So I'd like to welcome you again. To go further, can I invite Brother Teslim to do the open Quran recitation for us, please? Thank you.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين آمين.
Jazakallah khairan, Brother Teslim. May Allah continue to reward you abundantly in the effort you put towards propagating Islam. Without much ado, I'd like to hand over to Sister Zara, the Secretary General of MCB. Thank you for joining us. May Allah honor you for all the work you do tirelessly in our community. Over to you, Sister Zara, please.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I guess I'm really thankful to Sister Bilkisu for putting this webinar together, but also to all of the contributors, the panelists, and the guests, because this is a topic that we're really grasping with at a much more significant level than ever before. Through my travels across the country, one thing that was quite obvious is the socioeconomic deprivation that Muslim communities found themselves in some ways directly correlates to the impact on young people and violence. And particularly in some of my travels, you know, local community members were talking about the prevalence of knife crime or the percentage of Muslims in the prison population. And one of the Muslim chaplains said to me, Zara, like nationally, we're looking at about 13% in terms of representation. And we don't even make up that much in terms of the population. So I guess the critical question really is what's going on and why are young people still turning to crime, especially given how much we've diversified in this community. I'm 3rd generation myself, I guess, prevalence of opportunity, but I guess also looking at what are the hard-hitting challenges in which people find themselves in that place where they can't turn to help. And one of the other things that's been really good to see is all the initiatives that have been put in by local communities, both reactively to tackle what is going on, but be also proactively to see, well, how can we kind of get to the root cause of it? So I hope tonight's conversation is really about understanding what is really going on the ground. And I think it's not about typecasting any one group or saying, oh, well, everybody turned to knife crime because, you know, they're poor or their situation is that. People of all walks of life's backgrounds, male and female, are in some ways involved. And so I think we've got to really look at, what is our responsibility? And I think as the Muslim Council Britain, you know, our concern is how do we address the issues of our time, especially as we're now reaching our 25th anniversary, and we really have to look how far have we come, and what is the prospective future look like? What is our value proposition to those who are still to come? And I remember speaking to Sister Bilkisu about putting this webinar on. I said, you know, I think this is one of those issues that we don't like to talk about because we don't want to take ownership. And also, to what extent can we? You know, is this a criminal policing issue? Is this a social cohesion issue? Is this a religious, spiritual issue? Where does it fit? But ultimately, it doesn't really matter because young people need our support. They need to feel confident in the ability to reach out to us, but also in the process of community building. That's the thing that we're all involved in. I think we've got to do much better in supporting that. So I'm really keen that with all of the amazing organizations here today and the work that we continue to do, especially in the lead up to our Mosque Our Future conference, we can at least pioneer some ways forward. We're not going to figure it all out or fix it, but I think we should give it a go and see what we can do to make a difference. So Jazakallah khair again for everybody for taking the time, and inshallah, let's kind of see what we can do collectively, what works, what doesn't, but also let's be really honest about the problem and honest about our own contributions to it. So Jazakallah khair, Sister Bilkisu, I'll pass it back to you, and inshallah hoping for a really insightful conversation. Allah make it easy for us, inshallah. Ameen.
Thank you, Sister Zara, for that enlightening speech to start the program. So to start the conversation, I'm going to invite Brother Teslim to start. Like I said, what we want to focus on, what are the key challenges we face? Mm-hmm. What has been your experience, Brother Teslim, as somebody who has been in the community for a while? And like I said, with the rising cost of living, it is a reality, whether we like it or not. You know, in the past, it's always been said that people fall into crime because of poverty, lack of money. So those three areas I want you to probably touch upon before I hand you over to the next speaker. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Teslim.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Just want to start off by thanking everyone for the invites for this program. Inshallah, I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes our discussions fruitful and means by which we can start to tackle and find solutions to these issues. So on the topic of knife crime in particular, so alhamdulillah, I've been opportune to be amongst a large group of kind of youth leaders within our Old Kent Road Mosque in South London. And the topic of knife crime obviously comes up quite a lot. Again, it's something that even in my time, we've had to deal with growing up. And unfortunately, it seems the statistics show that it's been on the rise since that time period. And what we find as well, obviously the studies that, a lot of studies have shown that there's a socioeconomic, factor to this. People who are typically grow up in inner city towns, whether you're in London or Bradford or wherever, right? There's that element of knife crime always being a prevalent or constant feature of people's kind of lives, daily lives. And in honesty, there isn't much I can say about it. In reality, we do try and give these generic kind of supports and advice to these individuals. And the reality is, you speak to these youth on the ground, and it's not as if they don't know that, carrying a knife, potentially hurting another individual, doing things you're not supposed to be doing, selling drugs, doing this, doing that. It's not as if they don't know. A lot of people that I speak to, it's a case of they feel as if they don't have any other choice. They feel as if this is something that it's a norm in regards to the people that they're around. So I think there's still, obviously, we know that the reminder is always beneficial for the believer. I think the reminders need to be there from the community leaders and specifically from parents. I would say a lot of times we find it's a general trend. Obviously, there are exceptions to the rule, but the general trend is that the youngsters who we have the most difficulty with, unfortunately, come from households where, not necessarily broken, but there's some element of issues there. And I feel that parents have a massive undertaking in that regard. There needs to be a lot more support, and potentially a lot more support for parents themselves. At the end of the day, when we hear about these stories of an individual getting stabbed or an individual stabbing another, that's someone's son, that's someone's daughter, and the parents are the first people to feel that that impact, whether their son or daughter is the perpetrator or the victim of that situation. So I think parents need to be not to need to be more proactive, and I think more support needs to be given to them. Again, I probably see these the youth amongst our community once every 2 weeks when we have our bi-weekly brothers and sister circles, and it's not enough. Yes, I can kind of produce give a good talk, or give them support or whatnot, but that touch time isn't there. And in reality, if they're in a bad situation with friends and within their community, they see me for once every 14 days, and for the rest of those days they're with their friends, they're with those individuals who are taking them to pathways that aren't going to be beneficial for them. So I think I don't want to feel as if I'm picking on the parents, but honestly, I think they have the largest impact just because of that touch time that they do have with them. And I think that's one of the major ways in which we can start to tackle this. In addition to obviously youth initiatives, a lot of times parents do come up to me and say, well, they don't listen to me, they'll listen to you more, which obviously I've seen as well, that there has to be that kind of intermediary between the parents' generation and the children's generation. But kind of checks and balances are easier to make when you are a parent and you have that touch kind of distance to them. So this is in relation to obviously knife crime and any other social ills. A lot of kids turning to selling drugs. There's been an uptake across the whole of London in regards to fraud. And we need to mention the impact that social media has on this. A lot of our youth are on social media, are kind of exposing themselves to all sorts of content where we know people are living double lives. They're presenting a particular lifestyle, showing they've got this, they've got that, and essentially eliciting these sorts of base desires in our youth, where a 13-year-old is already thinking that I need to make 6 figures or something, all these crazy stuff, right? So we need to be careful in that regard. Social media isn't a given. It shouldn't be something that we kind of say, well, yeah, everyone's on it. I think there needs to be a serious discussion in terms of, especially when it comes to parents and young children, what they're exposed to, making sure that they have a good understanding in that regard. Because social media is a hotbed for conflict. And a lot of the times, maybe in my day, where you can only really get into a conflict when you're physically in school, or on the weekends when you see friends and whatnot. With social media, you can have conflicts at any single point in time. It could be one post here, one like there, one comment there, and all of a sudden a conflict has occurred and no one wants to back down. Somebody, someone's tweet insulting another goes viral. They then take revenge. It's just, you hear the story again and again and again. So I would say parents. I believe parents will play a massive role in this regard, and the community and the mosques, the community centers need to provide support for parents who are struggling, because most of the parents I speak to, obviously, they know they have that responsibility. They know that they're the primary kind of caregiver, but they struggle. They really do struggle to impact their children. So, but I think the fight still needs to be had. They need to, in any way which they can, be a constant presence within their lives. And I believe us as a community need to provide these resources, support to the parents. That's just my general thoughts. Apologies if it's going all over the place, but these are my kind of initial thoughts on that.
Oh, thank you. I mean, you've started the conversation, and I really welcome the focus of parent support, parent, and the influence of social media. Thank you for that as a starting point. We really appreciate that effort you've put into that presentation. And I'd like to welcome Brother Kamran. I know you've had a problem. I hope you can join us, Brother Kamran. Are you able to hear us? Brother Kamran, You can unmute you. Can I let me try. You can unmute yourself. I'll try to unmute you if I can here. Yes, if you unmute yourself, you should be able to join us. But Kamran, can you hear me?
I think he said in the chat that his Wi-Fi signal's playing up.
Okay. So may I move on to Brother Saleem for if we can move on to Brother Saleem, he can be the person. Again, thank you, Brother Saleem. Focusing on the challenges, you know, and a bit about what you think whether the rising cost has an impact and what you think we can do to address them, basically. Thank you, Brother Saleem.
Jazakallah, Bismillah, salatu wassalam, Rasulullah. Yeah, Jazakallah for inviting me to join the panel, and thank you for those who are participating. Yeah, so it's how do we solve this problem? So the cost of living, you know, social deprivation, as Brother Teslim mentioned, it's always been an issue. In Birmingham, in Small Heath, where our mosque operates, you know, we've got some of the highest rates of deprivation in the country. There's a bit of echo. That's just come on. Can you hear it?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So, but that's not the only driver for knife violence. You know, we see many issues in the community. I think Teslim mentioned parenting. It's a very important aspect of it all. Ultimately, you know, the kids spend most of their time either in school or in their homes, and I think many parents in our community suffer from mental health issues, domestic violence, marital issues, all sorts of issues that are taking place in the home that make the kids feel like they don't want to be there, or they take out their frustrations on the streets because of what's happening at home. Parents, you know, many of them probably weren't prepared to have children, probably weren't given the education around parenting. And even after having children, there's all sorts of issues to consider, like you know, women going into depression after pregnancy and after giving birth, and you know, sometimes even blaming their children for restricting their lives. And so there's lots of factors to consider. But really, if you don't have a happy home, it's going to contribute towards children going out and, you know, joining gangs or, you know, getting involved with the wrong crowds. And especially if you don't have that support network. My eldest son actually fell into the gang life and into youth violence and all the buzzwords you call it. And it was a very difficult period because we had raised him, you know, we quite, you know, comfortable in terms of finances, you know, had a good education. But then towards the age of 15, you know, he fell into the wrong crowd. Things weren't going right at home. Our relationship that was very strong beforehand started to suffer. And it was almost as though I could see myself losing my son. And I'm not the only example of that. You know, I've a very dear brother to us, Raymond Douglas. His kunya is Al-Khizra. He is actually a practitioner in youth violence, and he's been doing many workshops across the country. He's helped thousands of people, and sadly, his eldest son, was killed as a result of getting involved with gang violence and drugs, etc. And nobody would have thought it. This young man had everything in front of him. You know, he was educated. His father was a youth practitioner, but once you get involved with the wrong crowd and once you get pulled into it, either it's because you literally have no hope at home and you don't feel like there's anything that's there for you, or maybe you do have those things at home, but the excitement and the thrill of getting involved with the wrong crowds, the influence of social media, the influence of music and films and what you see on TV, it makes it seem appealing. It makes it seem like, you know what, I like a bit of that. You know, I want to get involved with that. You know, it's young teens who, you know, perhaps are unable to channel their emotions. You know, young men may have emotions. For example, as young Muslim boys, they can't have girlfriends. They're not going to have girlfriends and go out and channel their energy in that way. So, what are they doing to channel that energy? Now, some may be participating in sports and activities. Those who aren't doing that, where is all that energy being used? Now, if you're going out into the street and you see somebody fighting with somebody, or you see somebody, showing off in terms of their ego or show of strength, that can easily lead into somebody getting stabbed, somebody getting murdered, somebody getting killed. And then once that happens, something that exists that now that didn't exist when I was younger was, let's say you get into a fight nowadays, it's filmed and broadcasted across the internet. It's on Instagram, it's on TikTok, everywhere you go, and all of your mates, all of your people around you, the people in your crew will see that you've been beaten up or you've been humiliated. So you have to go and then do something back. You go and have to, salvage your ego and go and do something worse than what was done to you. And if you don't do that, your video, those videos are going to be up there and it's going to be embarrassment for life. So this is the way many youth are thinking. So it doesn't matter whether you come from a good home or not. If the energy and the energy isn't being channeled correctly, it can be misused. And that's why at Green Lane, we've tried, I could list off all of the things we do at the Masjid, and I don't think that's really important to this conversation. I think we definitely want more mosques to do more in terms of activities. So whether it's sporting activities, really trying to reach out to the youth and touching on the issues that they find important, not what we think is important. Obviously, we have religious texts and studies that we offer to those who are interested in studying. But what we've tried to do at Green Lane is open it up to kids that would never come to the masjid, kids that wouldn't even think twice, they wouldn't even want to come to the mosque. So we launched a youth club with a different brand. It wasn't called Green Lane Youth Club, it was called Link Up Youth Club. And before we launched it, we asked young people, what should we call it? What would young people be interested in? And we said, okay, what do you say to each other when you're meeting up with each other? And the simple answer was just link up. Yeah, let's link up. So we created Link Up Youth Club. And similar to youth clubs that have been running for decades, pool, PlayStation, whatever, but there was no pressure Islamically. There was no, oh, when you come here, you're going to have to pray. When you come here, you're going to have to learn hadith. When you come here, you're going to have to do that. Or you're going to even have to mix with an imam who's going to sit there and maybe you're going to feel uncomfortable. There was none of that. What we said is we're going to run it as a mainstream youth club. And naturally, by having it on site, the azan's going to go. They're going to hear the azan. They're going to see a large crowd of people going towards the mosque. And, alhamdulillah, that's worked. And the reason why we think it's so important is because when these youth are then falling into this trap, whether it's because they're from broken homes or they're struggling financially, or whether it's, they're good from good homes, but they just want to see what it's like to be part of that lifestyle, there's something wrong there. There's something wrong with their hearts. It means that they value that lifestyle more than they value their deen. It means that their hearts are becoming hardened and they'd rather go out and engage in violence or go out and trial themselves at drug dealing or something along those lines, instead of coming to the mosque and praying, instead of softening their heart by listening to reminders, instead of listening to the Quran. And it's not an overnight process. It's not, you can't just switch that on and you can't make a young person just see that straight away. But what you do is you create that environment, you create the safe space, no pressure, no, you have to come here and become a practicing Muslim straight away. Not even to say that, look, you're coming here so that eventually you can become practicing. It's just a case of saying, come here, this is a place you can enjoy yourself. And then over time, subtly, in subtle steps, they start to see, actually, you know what? I come to Green Lane Mosque and there's a youth club here. We actually enjoy it. We like being here. The youth workers are young. They're like us. They speak like us. They can relate to us. These youth workers have been through some of the stuff we've been through. They start to relate. And then they see these young people, these youth workers, going to pray, taking a break from the activities to go do wudu. when they start to have arguments inside the youth club. For example, there was one kid who was being racist the other day, and we said, okay, that's fine. We stopped the session. Okay, we're not going to kick this guy out. Let's stop everybody having their fun activities and let's have a talk about this. What was the need for you to be racist? Why did you say that? What provoked you to think that way and to talk that way? Just let's express ourselves. So they start talking about it, start discussing it. And then a little bit of Islamic element gets put in there as well. And then, the kids think, you know what? Yeah, that was stupid. That was a bit silly. And you know what? It was completely unnecessary. Now, if you don't have those environments and those spaces, those things will not happen. Those conversations, even if they're difficult, even if they're, annoying for the youth workers to deal with, that's the whole purpose of them being there. So that rather than being educated on the streets, they're being educated in these circles. And I think, I don't want to go on for too long, but I think the other thing that really was coming to mind was a lot of organizations over the years have tried hard. Youth have been falling into gang violence for decades, and it's almost like the same story repeating itself. There's just different elements that have come into play, but really those organizations who have got the power and the strength, MCB, mashallah, with Sister Zara in charge, have that intention and have that ability to make a long-term change, not just, okay, look, we need to do something about youth violence, let's tick it off, let's do this, and short-term investment in it. I think the MCB now are really trying to make a difference. Islamic Relief, they've funded a lot of our work, and we know that part of their aim is to try and solve youth violence in the long term, to try and get these young people, to think bigger than what they are at the moment. We've worked with organizations like Mercy Mission, who are launching a long-term plan where, young people, if they display characteristics where they can, even if they're not the best academically, but they've got entrepreneurial skills, they've got skills that they can perhaps build on, trying to get them into Muslim-owned businesses, to get work experience, to get life experience. So there's an alternative to being on the streets. Okay, it's hard to earn money, wages are low, costs are high. So the easy thing to do is to go out and deal drugs or make quick money through haram means. So what are the Muslim business owners doing to provide an alternative to these young people to say, actually, look, you don't need to do that. We're going to help you to make a lot of money and live clean and live a peaceful life by doing it the right way. So I hope that covers my part. Sorry to go on for too long.
I was tempted not to stop you because you really shared your personal experience that's making even more educated for all of us. And I think the key point for me just to draw from that while we move on is the fact that this can happen to even well-educated family. It's not about poverty, it's about family across board, and it can happen to any family irrespective of how you've brought up your children. And these are the lessons that we need to learn, that it cannot be me, God forbid. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for the insight you've given, and some of this we need. And I like the fact that in terms of youth activities, like you've said, the mosque needs to open up, link up activities with the youth. It's very, very essential to our youth program. Thank you so much. Can I now call up Brother Kamran, if you're able to join us?
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you. Again, we'd like you to share your experience, what we can do, and whether you think the impact of cost of living is affecting youth crime. Thank you.
No problem. My apologies for about sound before. My name is Kamran. I live in Manchester. I am currently a youth worker at Al-Khizra Mosque. My full-time position, I work as a youth offending officer. We tackle all sorts of issues in regards to behaviour with crime, knife crime, drugs awareness days and stuff like that, all across the board we work with. So I think in regards to my own personal experiences, in regards to growing up in an area where it's predominantly and African and Jamaican, growing up in the community, we always had Al-Khizra Mosque, which was a safe haven for us to always go, and we always felt safe within the mosque. in regards to my personal experiences growing up and some of the things that we were subject to, it was difficult in regards to seeing other people as a role model, because growing up in a Pakistani household, you are expected, or you have a lot of pressure to be a certain way, or you have to form or look a certain way. So I think in regards to the youth, following how we was in regards to, like, for myself, I'm 40 years old, so I'm like the second or first generation of Pakistanis in England. It's very difficult for the youth to connect in regards to some of the issues that we didn't face as we were growing up in regards to social media and the things that are so easily accessible at the moment, in regards to how the brother, is it Saleem, pointed out in regards to focus on solely on Islamic and Islamic perspective. Because when we was growing up, we would go to the Masjid and we would learn Arabic, and from a personal opinion, we wasn't taught the English translation, so we was going into the Masjid and was learning Arabic. And as alhamdulillah, as nice as it was in regards to us benefiting, what we would get from that was very limited because of the language barrier. We didn't have these certain places that were in place for us, what the youth have for today, for example, the youth club and stuff like that, and places for them to drop in. So I think in regards to the youth where I live at the moment, I think predominantly from a Pakistani perspective and from my own opinion, from where I grew up, I came from a household where I had my mum and dad. I had no brothers. I had 5 older sisters, alhamdulillah. The household was brilliant. I had a lot of love for my parents, but unfortunately, I went down the wrong way. I met a few friends, and we ended up doing a lot of stuff that we shouldn't be doing. At some point, when my parents were raising me, they did in some way instill some kind of goodness inside of me when I was young. And I strongly believe, as parents, as Muslim parents, what we instill in our children when they're younger, even though they might go off the road, they might fall into certain friendships, I think that goodness that we initially instill in them, inshallah, it will always come back and will always, inshallah, get on the right track. Me, as a prime example, I got into the wrong side of the law. I spent some time in prison, unfortunately, and growing up, I always knew the difference between right and wrong. Alhamdulillah, my father always was very disciplined, and he always taught me a lot of discipline and a lot of respect. In regards to respect from the youth at the moment, I don't think it's the same as how we was when we was growing up. For example, I could be doing something in my area that I shouldn't be doing, and if my father's friend see me doing something, he'd probably give me a clap right on the ear and say, "Go back home, and when I see your dad, I'm going to tell your dad." Unfortunately, I don't think that respect or that level of respect is there anymore, and I feel sometimes the youth are lost because that discipline that we had when we were growing up was a lot. It was an extreme in a way. It was delivered completely differently. I mean, I'm a father at the moment, and my son is 15 years old. And for example, when I was going through whatever I was going through as a youth, my dad will tell me off, and I'll probably get a little slap here and there. But moving on from that, I was never explained the reason why I was getting told off, or the reason why I was getting punished. Me coming to my son from a different perspective, where I've gone through everything that I've gone through as a youth. When my son's doing certain things now, I can sit down with him, and instead of me being physical with him or just shouting, I can explain to him and say, there's reasons why there's certain boundaries I put in place for you, Rita. That's my son's name. So I will explain to him and say, these are the things that I hopefully can keep you away from. And in regards to the Masjid do provide, alhamdulillah, a brilliant safe haven for the youth. But the problems still are within the community, because a lot of the kids in our community they do come from parents, like a household where there's two parents and they come from a loving family. So there's no real reason for them to go down that road, but they do, and we have to question why. And me personally, I do think it's because of certain role models that they see, and they want to make money fast, and they see certain role models, certain older people within the community that have got certain things that they might have to work 3-4 years or 5 years for them to achieve that. In regards to the mosque, the Khizra Mosque, me personally, myself, they've employed me within the last year. So I've been going in and I've been doing drop-down classes with a group of boys between 13 and 18 years old. And mainly I just talk about my own life experiences of grown up within the community. And I'm brutally honest with the youth. And I think in a way that's where I can relate to them, because I've been there, done it, and I wore the t-shirt, and I know it's not worth it at the end of the day. Our parents, as a kid, our parents would always say certain things, and at the end of the day, alhamdulillah, they are always right. And inshallah, the youth within what we are raising now, inshallah, that goodness will come back to them, and through education and meeting people who can relate to them and speak their language, and even just relating to them in regards to certain things that they could be going through, like social media problems and peer pressure within their own community and stuff. In regards to parenting within their own Asian community, sometimes it can go, I don't know if wherever it can go amiss, or sometimes the parents choose to turn a blind eye. As when I was growing up, I had certain friends who were doing certain things to make money, and they would have, for example, like an £80,000 car parked outside the parents' house, and the parents would not question their child and say, you have an £80,000 car, but you only work so and so, where have you got the money from? So sometimes there is barriers where we're challenging parents and educating parents to say there's certain things that you need to look out for when when your children are coming home, or when your child is coming home and stuff like that. So it is challenging. In regards to my own personal experiences, it is difficult, but I feel that the mosque do provide a brilliant environment, and I think through Islamic learning and learning about Islam, I think we can definitely help the youth going forward.
Thank you so much for that lived experience that you've been able to share with us, and I really applaud your courage, the fact that you're able to use your experience to work with the community. This is what we're hoping, that people listening to this kind of experience can learn from it. Certainly, we cannot provide solutions tonight, but we want people to learn from lived experience and be able to talk about it. So I really applaud your courage. Thank you so much for that. Without so much, can I call up Brother Abdul Ghafoor to please share his thoughts? What are the challenges? What are your thoughts in what we can do, and whether the cost of living will have an impact, as we've all been talking about? Assalamu alaikum, Brother Ghafoor.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and jazakumullah khairan for this opportunity. So I'm going to try to be as short and sharp, but try to answer those questions, and I think there's a lot to unpack in them. So I suppose in terms of key challenges, we've spent a lot of time in Luton working on what some of the root causes are. Why are people actually falling into particular behaviors that might lead to violent action, carrying knives as well? And ultimately, we've boiled them down to a few. So number one, self-worth and insecurity. And I think we've alluded to that. A number of the speakers have spoken about it as well. People carrying knives feel bigger. People feel that it gives them the self-worth that they're looking for. And perhaps that worth is lacking in other places, whether it be at home or in their social circles. Number two is about social value. So the ability to earn respect and street cred through carrying a weapon. Number three, we put down to fear. So a lot of people carry it just to protect themselves because they're afraid that other people will be carrying a knife. And 4, I suppose, is a contributor to many of the others, which is everyone today, not just young people, everyone is center stage with social media. It has put us all at the center of a bigger story. And oftentimes we find that violence is fueled and perpetuated through social media as well. So looking at those, what I would like to really state, and I think is very important for us, is that we have a great example in the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He's our uswatun hasana, in particular with this social challenge that we find. He, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Messenger of Allah, left Mecca and came to Medina, it was a community that was ravaged by knife crime on a massive scale. You know, we remember that the Medinan tribe split into the Aus and Khazraj had spent many, many years in constant battle and conflict against each other. And when the Messenger of Allah came to this area, he established a couple of principles that we think about locally and think about how we can restate those. So amongst them, if you read the constitution of Medina, the Prophet, peace be upon him, went through and restated the self-worth and what makes people Muslim. And he started it saying, people, regardless of their tribes and their family, are one ummah, you're one nation. He went on to talk about how the Ansar, the supporters, they will continue particular practices that had been used and were maintained for justice. So the concept of blood money, when somebody is killed, that they would pay blood money towards those that had lost. He maintained that and reinforced it, in fact, and established a social stigma against hurting somebody else. He specifically stated the importance of removing debts. We'll talk a bit later on about poverty and challenges around that. He talked about the importance of not killing another person, believer or disbeliever, nor supporting anybody else when you share the same faith. And I think within that, there's some fantastic principles for us to think about when we address this particular challenge. In terms of some of the local experiences and how we've tried to contextualize that and think about it in our local space, I'm also quite honored to be involved in a lot of schools and education locally. So I'm a director of a multi-academy trust. And we've done a lot of work thinking about where young people are, primarily in schools, where they tend to have some of that early education and perhaps interact with some of these social challenges, and how Masjid, how mosques can support with that as well. And so back in 2018, we experienced locally a very traumatic and difficult experience, losing a young Muslim. And we launched a whole set of initiatives locally that started with a knife crime conference, bringing educationalists, people within the community, activists, and a number of the statutory service providers. And we launched a quite big conference and had, I remember Imam Shakil came down from Luton and spoke alongside a number of other speakers there. And so that initiated a lot of other work within the schools and within the Masjid as well. So now more and more you'll find schools are looking at inclusion units rather than exclusion units. They'll work with challenged young people to try to keep them involved at school. And so we've got a number of inclusion units that are supporting and thinking about some of those challenges that young people are facing, whether it's personally, in their community, or at home. And thinking about whether it's cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, or other types of interventions, social skills training that they can support as well. So I think that's the second big thing that we've been involved in, is thinking about how we can bridge the gap and work with educationists that are already hosting and supporting young people in schools themselves. We've done a lot of work, like I'm sure everybody else in every other community, around anti-knife crime education and getting people within schools speaking about this, and in youth clubs and other spaces. There's 2 or 3 others I'd like to mention. Number 3 is around listening sessions. So in fact, it's odd that we have a discussion about youth without youth being in the room in this conversation and others as well. We spend a lot of time with listening sessions where we're talking about, and I heard it mentioned earlier on as well, really important just to spend a bit of time opening up some of those discussions. There was a great example earlier on around challenging racism and having a conversation about it, but also having listening sessions where you ask and collaborate and engage in that concept of shura to grow ourselves up and to grow others up as well about being responsible. The 4th thing that we've done, and I think has been really supported locally, is around our local masjid, Medina Masjid, we have a neighborhood watch scheme. And the neighborhood watch scheme is phenomenal. First of all, because it's associated to a national neighborhood watch scheme, which has got a whole series of activities around safety and thinking about taking responsibility for your own areas. So we cover 500 households that are around the masjid. And there's a whole range of people from all types of faith backgrounds and no faith background as well involved in that. And I think within that, there's a really important point, which is about taking responsibility for our own neighborhoods. This isn't about young people fixing up. This is about us as a community thinking about what's lacking, that young people perhaps are picking up knives and resorting to violence, where perhaps we didn't experience that. And so we've had projects like our gardening project, and sometimes I don't think we appreciate the sort of impact something like this has. It's interesting how in an area that's infested normally with a lot of drug dealing, when we set up a garden within that space, created a couple of raised beds, that people just don't gather in that space, almost out of respect, but also because there's a sense of social pride that the neighbors are now getting involved and taking responsibility for the area. So I think the impact of neighborhood watch schemes supporting faith institutions, I think, is phenomenal. And the last one I'd like to mention is mentoring as well. We heard it mentioned earlier on. It's not just about role models, because oftentimes we all ask ourselves the question, who's a role model? It's actually often about goal models. So actually someone aspirational that they can look up to, they can see, and most, to tell you the truth, we've got so many good, honest, hardworking people within our communities that are earning their bread and doing well. And it's important that young people can see that they've achieved their goals and they are supported, not to shine the light necessarily on them, but supported with the fact that many other people are able to do this. To address the last question, which is around the cost of living crisis, just this week we heard the Mayor of London talking about how that's going to exacerbate poverty, deprivation, and lead to an uptick in violent crime, almost preempting it quite sadly. But I think just in terms of parting advice, because we do recognize the impact of poverty, although as we heard in that earlier example, and I do a lot of work with our local prison as well, oftentimes it can be quite affluent families. And it comes back to those core reasons. There's something missing which may not necessarily be money, but perhaps it's attention. I heard something really beautiful the other day that said, rather than giving presents to your kid, just give them your presence. Be there. And I think this is a really important point. We should be there for our kids and our neighbors' kids and our community, and really think about how we contribute towards that community. So I think we've got to recognize that young people are still developing, and we should perhaps not only lead by example, but recognize that perhaps their emotional maturity, their language, their ability to be able to deal with challenges, the resilience in doing so safely, that's going to be quite limited, like it was with us at that age as well. So I think being emotionally present, available for our young children is really important, and most importantly, being responsible adults ourselves, but then being aware about irresponsible adults. We know that in our communities, unfortunately, there are people that take advantage of vulnerable, disaffected young people, those that perhaps are angry or those that are separating away from whether it be family or community or school community itself, and take advantage of and prey on some of those young people. So I think it's important that we're vigilant about that, and also recognize that in fact this is a wider issue than just we can fix. This is not a masjid is going to solve this issue. It's a social issue, and there's an important point here around multi-agency working. Some of the work we've done at schools, there's actually a program called Beyond the Gate that we've experimented with in a local school that thinks about how you can bring the different stakeholders together. So we start thinking about government policy, policing, availability of knives, unemployment in a more systemic way. And then the last point, I suppose, is just understanding social media and thinking about how we can control it ourselves and ensuring that everybody out there, young or old, is using it safely and responsibly. So that's a very quick whistle-stop tour of my thoughts and some of what we've been experimenting with locally.
Jazakallah Karam, Brother Ghafoor, this is quite, again, very insightful. The context you bring to this in terms of the inclusion aspect, that's not about excluding, but being inclusive in schools to make sure that our kids are well educated. The fact that, working together as a community, we're all stakeholders, and this is quite important for us to make sure that, so for the youth to have good role models, we have to work together as stakeholders. So thank you for your own insight and lived experience and what you've been able to bring. And the fact that must have to go wider than what we do, that's also been quite helpful. Thank you all the speakers. You've all been very educative, and I hope we have a number of participants on the platform, a lot of attendees. We've got about 5-10 minutes for questions. So what I like to propose is this. We have our speakers that have spoken. You've heard what they've said. I've got one hand raised. Brother Razak Salahuddin has joined us and has raised his hand for question. May I invite you just to speak briefly, cautious of time. We welcome your question. Over to you, Brother Razak Salahuddin, please. Can you? Are you able to talk, Brother Salahuddin? Okay. Can you unmute yourself? Permission to talk here, Brother Salahuddin? Can you hear me? You should be able to talk to ask your question. Or Ola Azan, can you talk to ask your question? You should be able to talk to ask your question.
Hello, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Let me first thank the organizers for this beautiful and very important aspect of our living together, because we should all see ourselves as being in a relay. Some people, probably from every part of the world, handed over the baton, and we have to run our own race by handing over to the next generation. That is what I see that we're doing. However, I just want any of the speakers to respond to this.
That's what I'm saying.
What are we doing as not just individuals or small communities within the bigger community to do together, come together and really address these issues? I know it is Hydra-headed problem. It can be solved by only one person. But if only one group is doing one thing, another group is addressing almost the same thing, what are we doing together as a bigger group to address and find solution to this problem of criminal activities, drug and crime and things and more? Thank you.
Jazakallah, Brother Wale Azan. I mean, I think that's one of the key things I would like us maybe as a takeaway from this presentation today. What can we do collectively together as a community? Can I invite either Brother Teslim or Brother Saleem to maybe give their view? Either one of you is still on the line. Any of the speakers, if you're able to give your view on that, what can we do together collectively to address this issue?
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jazakallah Abdul Ghafoor for your speech. It was very impactful. Collectively, what we've tried to do with the mosque in Birmingham is on community matters, we've tried to unite where we can. And even if that's not publicly uniting and going out there saying, you know, we're all together and we're working together, because there's various reasons why you can't do that. Where there's areas where you can work on together, like community cohesion, like youth and gang violence, because at the end of the day, on our streets, it doesn't matter which mosque you attend, you know, kids are being killed and stabbed and murdered almost every day. You know, it doesn't matter anymore whether it's in an area where families, you know, visit, like the high streets or in residential areas. Bullets are going through car windows when mothers are walking down the roads with their pushchairs. So in these matters, we really do need to come together. And what we've said at Green Lane is, you know, we're open to sharing our best practices with other mosques. And, you know, we're very open to learning from other mosques as well. You know, and you know, regardless of which background they're from, if they have good ideas on how we can work together and address these issues within the community, you know, let's try to do that without compromising our own principles. So I think, you know, definitely sharing those best practices, and, you know, it can be as simple as, you know, giving advice on how to maybe receive funding, because many mosques are worried that, you know, we just haven't got the time, we haven't got the money to do this, and we haven't got volunteers who are willing to do the work. So you know what, we just can't do anything about it. And we're turning around to them and saying, no, actually, it is quite easy. And if you need some support filling in an application on how to obtain funding, if you need advice on, you know, what you need to be doing. For example, there was a Gambian masjid that just started recently or just set up recently, and they came to Green Lane and they said, look, you know, we just don't know where to start. We've got a building. We're not doing anything with it other than the prayers, and we really want to, you know, do some community work and you know, do what you guys are doing. And we said, look, it didn't happen overnight. It took many, many years, but there are some quick wins. You know, for example, like with our food bank, that's a great dawah opportunity. It's a great way to bring in the community, whether Muslim or non-Muslim, and really engage with the community. And with the youth work, it can be very simple things. It can be, you know, arranging football once a week. It could be arranging a space where the youth can come and you know, and socialize. So just, you know, not keeping things to yourself, you know, share with other people and encourage other people to get involved and to be active. And if you can find solutions where, you know, you're giving them the solutions by saying, look, it's not as hard as what you think, you know, having those conversations and convincing those people who have perhaps got the potential, but they're not using it, to actually do something about it, then, you know, the more mosques get together, the more the mosques are engaging in youth work, then that, you know, filters through to the parents, and then you know, we can then reach the parents as well, and start bringing the parents in for different activities as well. And it may be, you know, mothers are so stressed and depressed, and they haven't got time, or haven't got the energy to deal with their children. Why? It's because they never get out their house themselves. So what do? You open up a coffee morning for sisters, or you open up a counseling service. You know, we get people, you know, who are willing to volunteer as counselors. The women get some respite. They can bring their kids with them. Their kids can enjoy stuff in the mosque. So there's so many things you can do. But, you know, I think in short is working together, sharing best practices, and encouraging those who perhaps thinks it's too difficult, and giving them real life examples of where we can actually do this work quite easily.
Thank you. Jazakallah khairan, Brother Saleem. I think the key point you've actually hit the nail is the unity, working together and sharing best practice. And that will be one of the takeaways that we'll take away, and hopefully in future, on behalf of MCB, we'll probably take that away to see how we can take that forward to unite the community together, because we've got a lot of work to do. This is just a starting point of our youth engagement. And before we move the event, if there's, I think Alhaji Salahuddin raised his hand. If you want to ask your question, are you able to talk now before we round up the program? Alhaji Salahuddin or any other person. One more question, if anybody wants to ask a question. We're into closing thoughts from the floor now. The floor is open before we run it up, because it's been really helpful to have different people on the platform, and we don't want it to be a talking event. We want some contribution as well. So I've opened it up now for a couple of minutes for any closing thoughts from the participant attendees as well. If you have any question you want to ask, please raise up your hand and we can call you to talk now. I think, yep. I think we've answered the question from Brother Wale Azan. If there are no questions, we will definitely take away from what Brother Saleem said. As a takeaway from this is the fact that we as a community have to work together, unite, and share best practice. And hopefully the long-term project will be what we can share together to address the wider issue. I'm going to call on one of the Assistant General Secretary, Sister Rashida, to give us some closing thought before we round up. Sister Rashida, please, over to you. Your Wi-Fi, are we able to hear you, Sister Rashida? Sister Rashida?
While we're waiting for Sister Rashida, if I could just make just
Yes,
one
please
comment.
come in, brother.
Yeah.
Please come in. Yeah.
Just about that last question, because I think it's important to recognize, first of all, we are responsible. We are able to respond in this situation. Young people pass through our hands. Every one of these people, perpetrators or victims, has normally been a child in our masjid, maktab at some point. So it's important we recognize that we have a really important part to play here. But also we recognize that this is a social problem at quite an unprecedented scale. It's not just something that we're experiencing on a local level, it's happening everywhere. So there's definitely some common characteristics, but you can't eradicate all social problems necessarily nationally at the same time. Poverty is a good example of that. It's not eradicated everywhere all at once. Rather, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam established a mechanism to provide zakat and sadaqah for people that were in need. And in thinking about what we're doing collectively, I think it's important to look at other initiatives like this. I worked in public health for a number of years, and cigarette smoking is probably one that we can relate to, because the perception about cigarettes and smoking cigarettes has changed so much since when we were young. But that was behavior change at a massive scale. And in terms of what took place nationally, there was definitely sharing of good practice, but there was a large amount of investment into media and marketing. And ultimately, what really changed things was education. When people understood the impact of a cigarette upon their health, then you don't need to write smoking kills on the side of the box anymore. It becomes something really fundamental. And I think that level of change is something that we need to think about in terms of how do we support not just our institutions, but all institutions to amplify that message as well. And ultimately, we can't control everything, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can. So our dua, inshallah ta'ala, is critical at the beginning, middle, and end of all of these activities.
Karen, for that, how do we support? Again, these are the takeaway. We will take those away, and inshallah we'll work on that. If Sister Rashida is not able to talk, I'll call on Brother Jalil Oladejo, one of the committee members, to give some closing reflection before we round up the program. Brother Jalil Oladejo, some closing thoughts from you, please, if you're able to speak. Are you?
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum salam, Brother Oladejo. Over to you. Thank you.
Alhamdulillah for a successful program today. We thank Almighty Allah. This is really important to us, as a community, and then as Muslims living in the UK. And then, tackling youth violence is something that is rampant, and then it's something that it's a wake-up call for all Muslims in the UK that we need to, encourage our youth, on the deen of Islam, for us to understand we can be whatever we want to achieve, being a Muslim. So we don't have to have the peer pressure or let what is going on within our friends or peer groups, divert us onto the wrong path. So it is really, really important that we focus and we stay. One of the things is, having a good mentor as well is something that helps, that will help us to guide in the right direction. And I think communities are doing this so that we can have our youth on the right path, inshallah. We thank Allah that has made it possible. And then I've learned a lot, I've noted a lot for myself, and then for my family and friends that I can share with. So, this shouldn't be the last. Let us continue. Inshallah, we thank the organizers of this program. It's been really, really, educative. And then we thank all the scholars that have given talks today. May Almighty Allah reward you abundantly. And then we thank our chief or chair host as well, Elijah. May Allah continue to strengthen you as well, and then give you the barakah in this world and in the hereafter, inshallah. So all the path that we want all our youth to tread, inshallah, may Almighty Allah make it easy. Bismillah wal hasr. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal hasr. Inna al-insana lafi khusr. Inna al-lazina amanu wa haminu salaha. Wa tawasaw bil haq. Wa tawasaw bil sabr. Subhana rabbika. Rabbil izzati yama yasifun. Wassalamu alaykum. Walhamdulillah rabbil alamin.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We really appreciate you on behalf of Muslim Council of Great Britain, the proudly Muslim and Black Committee. We are grateful for your participation, your attendance. We've been really enlightened today. We've learned a lot. And like I said, this is a series of programs. The Youth and Gaming is a series of programs we've done by the committee, and we're hoping to do a bigger, probably conference later in the year. That's certainly the takeaway in terms of sharing best practice, effecting change. We'll be taking that forward. Thank you all. Salam alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Wishing you a blessed evening and a good week ahead.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam.